Hi, in this video, I want to talk more about the idea of scope when writing a program. So we've talked briefly about scope, which is basically where variables can live, and there's more details that are important here. So we basically want to understand when a variable name, an identifier, is usable or accessible in code. So variables, names exist in a certain scope, and let's write a little method here to start looking at that. Static, make it void, and we're just calling this scope test, and I'm gonna have a parameter in here. Just x is, I don't know what it is, so I'm just, not really giving it a meaningful name here. And int I equals 0, and of course I can print out I here. And if I call scope test down here, I expect to see that 0 value printed out, right? So what is this? Oh, I gotta pass in some number, which doesn't mean anything yet. So if I call this, it starts executing in main, call scope test, comes up here, I equals 0, print out I. Now, a couple things to note. One is that I cannot use I down here. It says that I is unresolved, and that's because, again, a variable exists from where it is declared to the end of the code block it is in. So in this case, I can use I anywhere from here to right up to there, but as soon as I finish the method, I isn't accessible anymore. So we've seen that before. And I'd like to point out that we previously talked about the idea of a qualified name, which is the set of package names you have to get through to get to a certain class. And basically, a qualified name says how you access certain things, and scope says what actual values does this thing resolve to, like where is it declared, initialized, and what's its current value, and the scope kind of tells you that. Okay, so those are pretty simple rules so far. We can also make, let's make in here, I'm gonna make just like a little tiny sort of dumb if statement that it always executes because the condition is true, and it's gonna have its own code block like we'd like to have. And in here, I'm gonna declare and assign a variable to variable j, and I can use it in here. So if I print out j instead of I, that's allowed. So it should print out 2, and then it'll print out 0. If we run that, we should see it at least, 2 and 0. What's the scope of j here? Well, it's from where it's declared to the end of its code block. And after that, for example, if I try to use it, here I'm going to get an unresolved variable. In other words, it doesn't know the name j in this location here, and that's because it's outside of the scope where j was declared. All right, so j goes away as soon as it leaves its scope. It's not just when it leaves a method, it's when it leaves any code block like that. So that's important. I'd like to point out that, one immediate thing from this is that what we've seen, that a method has its own code block. Variables declared in that method, what are called the local variables of the method, only exist in the method, and this is a good thing. Basically, it means that I can't somehow try to grab information that maybe persisted after calling this thing. The only way in and out of a method is you send information through the parameters, and you return values if it has a return type to get information out. And we can't just sort of grab things out of the middle of it where we don't have a lot of control over that kind of behavior. So this is a good thing. I'll also point out there's some special cases for scope. X, the parameter x here, counts as being in the scope of the method. So even though it's declared a little bit before it, it counts as being in the scope here. So it only exists inside the method body here. And then there are other special cases, like for index equals 0. Well, I don't have a index less than 5, index plus plus. this index variable also belongs to the loop body here, right? So I can use index in here, and obviously it's used up in the for statement itself, but I can't use index after it. It says it's unresolved, cannot be resolved. Okay, so special cases are this parameter and like the for loop here creates the variable before the actual scope seems to start. You cannot have a duplicate declaration in the same scope. So if I say int I equals 1, that's not allowed. It's going to say here duplicate local variable I. And that's true even if I try to change the type of it, right? So I can't sort of halfway down suddenly say, oh, it wasn't int, now it's a double. So that's not allowed. Of course, what you are allowed to do is just reassign a new value to that variable, right? And that's typically what you want to do, like that. So parameter, special case. When we have a nested scope, there's two rules to that. One is, here I'm using I that was declared in this outer scope. I can still access that I. First it looks to see if there's an I declared here, and there's not. So then it says, okay, what else do I know about? I know about this I up here. And so I can use it in that inner scope. What I cannot do is try to redeclare it even in the inner scope. Okay, so even though it's declared out here, that kind of uses it up for any code that's, you know, part of this whole sequence here. I can't, just by going into an inner scope here, I cannot make a new variable of the same name. Other languages actually do allow us to do that, like C++, for example. You can have those nested variables, and then there's distinct entities, but Java doesn't let you do it. And I think there's a good reason for that. It's just a little confusing, right? So we can access it here, but we can't make another one in here. Let's see. One place where you can seemingly redeclare it is in sequential scopes. So let me get rid of this. I don't have anything in the loop body here. And let me get rid of that. So here, I have two different for loops, each with this index variable. And that's useful because index means something. We're trying to like go over the indices of a string or something like that, and index is a perfect name to use in that context. This index exists in this scope. This index exists in this scope. Those are different scopes. They're sequential, one after the other. They don't overlap. They're not inside each other. And so you're allowed to create multiple versions like that. And again, some names are just great, and we want to use them in different places, different methods, and so on. And so it's nice that they only have scope for where they are, and we can redeclare them somewhere else and like reinitialize them to 0 and so on. Now, I will also like to point out that some languages want you to do things like declare all the variables you're sort of planning on using sort of first up top. I'd say that's an older style. The general rule of thumb we like now is that declare it where you need it and only where you need it. So like if this J is only used in this little scope here, declare J in this scope, and then it goes away afterwards and you can kind of forget about it and not worry about it. And when you're trying to see where J came from, it's easy to figure out how it was initialized. So keeping things as local as possible is very useful like this, and you need to get used to one, seeing what's allowed, and then two, you know, what's good style for using these rules. Okay, so that's it on scope. Once we add more to learn how to make our own classes, there'll be a little bit more to learn about that. But for now, this is enough to kind of get you moving comfortably, hopefully, through various scenarios in code. Thanks.